Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at, I know it's the busiest time you could possibly have as you're kicking off your school years all across the country. So thank you for joining me. I hope that this time gives you some ideas about how to implement project-based learning, either at a building level or at a district level. If you're an administrator looking to make project-based learning a reality, I hope to give you some ideas and tips that can help you with that. And I promise I'll get you out of here at 4:30 Eastern time, because like I said, time is really valuable, especially this time of year. So if you haven't joined us before, or haven't done a session with me, I'm Tara Tarango with the Van Andel Institute for Education here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and delighted to share this topic with you. It's something I'm super passionate about. So we'll start with a few housekeeping items, frequently asked questions. The number one question we get is, will this webinar be recorded? And the answer is yes. So very shortly after we're done, sometimes even tonight, maybe sometime tomorrow, you'll get an email with a link to a recording. So feel free to share that with other folks if that's helpful for you, or just to revisit it at your leisure. Also, the second question we usually get is where, is there a handout that goes with this? And the answer is yes. So all the resources that I talk about, don't feel like you have to jot all those down, all those websites or research articles down. They're all here for you in this one resource document. So you can go to that bit.ly, or I believe in the chat box, you might see that pasted for you. You can click it there if you want to follow along or if you want to check it out later. And that didn't just magically appear over there in the chat box. That came because we have our friend Robin here. You want to say hi, Robin?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
As much as I feel like I'm in 20 places at one time, I can't actually run the webinar and answer any technical questions that come up. So she's really here to help out with all that stuff that happens in the background and does a great job. So if you have any questions, something breaks on you, you can't figure something out, feel free to reach out to her and she'll help you out. All right, so I also want to tell you that this webinar is sponsored by Blue Apple Projects. These are projects that really can help teachers implement project-based learning. We'll talk a little bit about that as we get in here, how sometimes it can be really time-consuming to create all those lesson plans, find all those real-world connections. So if you're interested in making that a little bit easier for your teachers with the project-based learning unit that has all the lesson plans and supplies, you might want to check that out. And I'll talk about some more discount opportunities for you at the end. But at any time, you can use the discount code webinar to get 10% off of those. All right, so we will talk today about why project-based learning, and particularly why now. I think there's some really interesting things happening in the timing of what's going on in education that make it a really unique and a great time for PBL. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about what project-based learning actually is, what it looks like in the classroom, how does it connect to the rigorous content our teachers need to teach. And then lastly, how do you as an administrator ensure the successful implementation of PBL? How can you make sure your teachers are ready to be successful in doing this? So it's only 30 minutes, so usually this is at least a one-day workshop, if not 2 or 3 days sometimes. So I'll just touch on some of the highlights, and hopefully there's something that you can take away right away. And if there's anything that piques your interest or you have questions about, feel free to reach out to me. And at the end, we'll offer a free lunch and learn. So I'll tell you how you can get entered to when we'll send lunch to about 30, I think it is, of your teachers. And we'll offer them a quick little practical PD that hopefully they have a lot of fun with and get a free lunch out of. So stay tuned for that. All right, why project-based learning? I want to start with kind of some of the research, and it's been really great this fairly recently. There came out from the George Lucas Educational Foundation 4 studies that really highlight how PBL increases student performance. And I think this is one of those things that most of us, especially if you're on this webinar, you probably already buy into it just intrinsically. You know that if students are engaged, if they're doing meaningful and relevant work, that has got to lead to better performance. But it's really nice to now have some data that supports that. So looking at that, I want to talk about, there are a few different studies that came out of that. And looking at it from all different grade levels, which I also think is really important. So one of those studies out of the University of Southern California was looking at AP US Government and Politics and AP Environmental Science. And in that study, they showed that across the 2 years, the likelihood of PBL students to receive a 3 or above was 8 to 10% higher than their peers who didn't have PBL. And this was primarily in some urban districts, which I think is a good way to look at the different demographics that these studies offered. The next one, so that was high school. This one was 3rd grade science. And again, PBL students performed 8% higher on those science assessments, regardless of their reading level going in, which I think is really critical. And it shows a positive increase in value students place on reflection and collaboration. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more in terms of social emotional learning. The third study looked at second grade and particularly low income students and how that PBL using that really led to a really incredible increase of 5 to 6 months in social studies and 2 months of in informational reading. So some great increases and gains there. And then the last study out of Stanford here mentioned or looked at sixth grade, and those students receiving PBL science curriculum made gains not only in science, but also in math and ELA. So I thought that was really important also to look at how the cross-curricular nature of PBL can give you gains across a variety of different content areas. So 8 to 28% depending on which content area assessment they were taking. So in case it's something that you need a little bit more concrete evidence around, or if it's something you get asked about, some of these research studies I think are a great thing to point to in terms of some real tangible evidence of how PBL increases student performance. So not only performance though, I really like to look at it for accelerating learning and increasing engagement. And I think particularly now as we look at how do we come out of the pandemic and all the instructional time we've lost and all the different distractions to really accelerate learning. And I think that PBL can really do that. Number one, it gives you an authentic context. And when you have that, there's just that greater sense of buy-in from the students, which gives you that engagement. And you have a deeper level of understanding, right? So once you have that deeper level of understanding, you can go much quicker by having that authentic context. Also, I mentioned this earlier, the cross-curricular nature of PBL is a really great way to accelerate learning. So you can have one project that touches on multiple different content areas instead of having to stop and start over and again. So that's another way to sort of save time and accelerate learning. Obviously, PBL has an element of student-driven kind of piece to it, and that's going to increase your engagement. And also sustained inquiry, this idea that they're working on projects over a sustained period of time. It's not just one classroom. And I think by class period rather. And by doing that, it actually allows you to accelerate the learning as well, right? If you are doing something lesson by lesson and somebody misses a day, then it's on the teacher, that burden is on the teacher to fill that gap for that student and the next student and the next student that each have these one-off missing days. Whereas if you have a sustained inquiry project, then students can kind of come in and out of it if they need to miss a day or they need to be quarantined, if we have to go back into all of that. But they know the big picture of the assignment, so they can kind of keep that train going despite sort of what might happen in terms of distractions. So bottom line, I think it can accelerate learning and increase engagement because you're teaching more content in less time, which is really what we want to do. And one of the things I like to tell teachers, so if you have one thing that you want to offer some advice to your teachers who are thinking about doing project-based learning and they want to accelerate learning and increase engagement, I would tell them to rethink the lesson planning process in this way. So a lot of times as teachers, we'll think, here's something I have to teach, right? Decimals maybe. Now, how can I make that interesting and relevant? So if you're like, how do I make decimals interesting and relevant? That just seems really daunting and hard and forced, right? But if you switch it and you think, what would my students find interesting and relevant, right? Maybe there's something they really care a lot about. We'll show you a video of a project like this, and they want to create a podcast about it so they can tell the world about the stand they want to take on this particular issue. Well, then how could you connect, let's say, decimals to that? Think of all the decimals you could work with in the podcast recording, right? And the different timestamps. So usually if you kind of switch that process and think, what will they find interesting? I take on this challenge with teachers all the time. And I say, give me whatever it is you need to teach. I bet if you have something interesting and relevant, you can find a way to connect whatever it is you need to teach to that topic. So flip that process. Instead of I have to teach X, how can I make it interesting? What can I do that's going to interest my students? And then how can I incorporate X into it? The third reason why I think project-based learning is something we want to be looking at is it really develops those social emotional skills, which are obviously in such big demand right now. Particularly, everything from, just not having been in a typical school environment for 2, sometimes 3 years. A colleague of mine said the kids are straight up feral. She described them that way. So there is just this kind of needing to relearn how to work with one another and how to value one another's opinions and how to learn. What's the process of learning and what's the skills I need to bring to learning. So I bring back that second study from those research articles and just want to highlight again how PBL increased the value students place on reflection and collaboration. So I think those skills in particular can really drive, whether it's self-reflection, self-regulation, collaboration, how to work with other students. PBL can really bring about a lot of those things to help with those social emotional learning. So I'll give you a couple examples of these. I know I'm going to go through really fast because I have tons of content for you. But just to give you a couple examples, here's a project called The Dirty Truth. And this is one where the students get to look at what it would take to live on Mars in terms of what kind, they do science experiments to think about what kind of soil you would need or what you would need to add to the soil to grow radishes in their experiment versus what it takes to preserve Earth, right? So doing something like that, and then they end up choosing a side and making a commercial for that. So if you think about social emotional skills, the opportunities for that, well, students are collaborating to successfully complete that project. They have to work together and cultivate those positive group dynamics, right, to be able to create a commercial that is compelling for the cause that they chose. So that's just one example that can kind of go across multiple projects. But here's a really specific one too. Another project is called Prevent the Spread, sort of timely. And in this case, among other things, they look at creating a public service announcement on how to stop the spread of germs and looking at what different germ killers, right, work the best. But as part of that, they learn a little bit about vaccines and the story of how Dr. Jenner tested the first vaccine on his gardener son without the gardener son or his parents knowing about it, right? A really controversial move that maybe benefited mankind, but could have been potentially horrific and really, unethical for Gardner's son here, right? So something like that, a controversial kind of moment in history that is related to the project, gives the students the opportunity to discuss, responsible decision making, what they consider to be right or wrong, right? So those kinds of opportunities, a project that's meaningful and that they care about, gives them the chance to open up and do some self-discovery, self-awareness, and think about what's important to them and how to communicate that and how to respect that in others. So just a couple examples of how some PBL projects can really dive into some of those social emotional skills. So outside of all that, I just think if we take a step back and think about where we are right now, whether you call it learning loss or instructional loss or all the different terms that are out there for it, there are gaps, right? There's no like getting around the fact that we have had some disruptions and that we need to bridge those gaps. But I think, in the same way that we had to overnight change and all of a sudden start learning how to do virtual learning, if we can change like that, not to say I want to do that again, that was not fun, but if we did it, and if we could do that, why can't we now reinvent learning on our own terms and the way we actually want to in a purposeful way, the way we've always wanted to teach it? So I think that there's this newfound kind of confidence that we can do hard things in education, and maybe this is a chance to really reinvent teaching and learning. And I think about it this way: what if our schools were beacons of curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking? And I was talking to, or I read an article from an administrator actually, where he said, the pandemic has made me realize that unless we find ways to focus on students as people and engage them as people and make the work we're doing important to them where they are now, everything is for nothing. We have to start with them as people. So just a very human statement, but I feel like right now that resonates maybe more than it ever has in, at least our living knowledge, right, in terms of education, and that we're craving authenticity after such a strange world we've been in. So I would just like to put it out to you that I think project-based learning can be used not only to accelerate learning now, but to build a foundation for future teaching and learning, to really create the kinds of schools, classrooms, districts that we all got into the profession to sort of realize. So that's my pitch on why PBL. You're here, so you probably didn't need all of that, but hopefully there's something that you can use to convince others if that's something you need to do. But now I want to give you some of the nuts and bolts around what project-based learning is, some things that you can take to your teachers as well to help them understand what it is and what it isn't, because I think there's sometimes some breakdown in that. So I'd like to have you think to yourself for a minute about what are those characteristics of an authentic learning experience. Kind of take out the jargon of it for a minute, of PBL, and just think, what's an authentic learning experience? So you might come up with different terms and another friend might come up with another set of different terms, but I think it's important to have your own list of what it looks like, because that's when you know you're doing it, right? How do you know you're successful if you're not all on the same page with your teachers about what it looks like? So I'll give you some of the characteristics that I often kind of land on, but feel free to take these, adjust them, take some, steal some, leave some, add to them, whatever you want to do to make your own list. But these are just some of the things that I think about. So one, I mentioned this earlier, sustained inquiry, the idea that this isn't done just in one class period. For the Van Andel Institute where I work, we are also associated with a research institute, and those scientists are from all over the world, and they're studying different diseases and different ways to improve human health. And the problems that they're working on aren't resolved obviously in an hour, but even years, even decades, right? So what are we doing in our classrooms to prepare students for that kind of perseverance and problem solving? So obviously we can't provide, years worth of study maybe on some of these projects, but we can start building in more sustained inquiry to make that process a reality. I think having an authentic audience is another key characteristic of an authentic learning experience. This is really just thinking about who are the students going to show their work to? And I think engagement is directly related to this, in that if they show it to me as a teacher, maybe the ones who really, really love me or care what I think, but most of them really don't care if they look, really stupid in front of me. But if the minute I bring in someone who is an expert on that topic, or someone whose life has been impacted by that topic, then all of a sudden they really care if they're going to look stupid in front of that person, right? So bringing in some authentic audience for the students to present their work to can really increase that engagement. A level of iterative thinking is always a great characteristic, right? The chance to reflect on your learning, get some feedback, make it better. So often we want to just move on to the next thing. And this is really where the learning happens. It's in that reflection and iterative thinking and design thinking sort of phase of things. So building in time for that is a key characteristic. Some level of student choice and ownership. Again, that's going to drive that engagement, which is obviously another piece. I do think cross-curricular, as much cross-curricular you can bring into it, even if you are a high school teacher and you teach, let's say, high school science, right? Maybe you can work with another teacher who's doing another content area, or maybe you can go across different sciences, right? Different life science or science. But the more cross-curricular nature you can bring into it, the more authentic that context is, the deeper and richer the learning is. Some sort of real world application. I think this is sort of the hallmark of PBL, that the students are doing something that they can apply outside the classroom that's meaningful in their community or in their world. And collaboration, this idea that, and I mean, not just like, well, let's work together and, I'll hold the piece of string and you cut it, right? But actually make meaning together. What is something that I need that you're studying, and something that you're studying or you need that I'm studying, and we can really share information, because that's how learning happens in a lot of organizations now in our world. So like I said, that is kind of an overview of the characteristics that I like to point to. And then here's a nice, I do this with teachers all the time, and it never fails. After I'm done, they always tell me, after a whole workshop, they'll be like, that was the most meaningful thing to me. I thought I was doing project-based learning, but it's really just a project. So I'm not going to take the time to go through it all with you, but I want to at least show you how it works here, and you have the sorting cards in your handout. But it's the idea that we'll give a scenario, and this is a really easy one to start with. After learning about nutrition, the students design chef and create chef hats. Is that a project or project-based learning? And so that one goes more in a project, especially if you compare it to students learning about nutrition, creating healthy recipes, and holding a family feast day with their community. So that one's pretty obvious. There are a couple more examples here that aren't quite so obvious, or that just show it's actually not really an on-off, or like project is bad and project-based learning is good, but more of a continuum to say, if you're doing something that's engaging with your students, how can you add a little bit more of those characteristics that we just talked about to make it more of a project-based learning type of unit and experience. So for the sake of time, I'm going to just roll right through these, but trust me, take a look at those later. Use the cards with your teachers. You can just print them out and give them to them and have them play this quick little sorting game. It's a great way for them to see whether they're really doing project-based learning, and to kind of inspire them to level up that a little bit. All right, I am going to show you a video now of, it's about a 2-minute video of one of these projects in action. This Take a Stand that I mentioned earlier. So see if you see any of those characteristics, in play as you watch this video. So it's about 2 minutes long.
So in Take a Stand, my kids were able to pick a topic, learn how to debate respectfully with each other, and then they were able to build a podcast and share that issue with other parents and people around the world.
After they get a word, people that disagree with you to see if they have a better point. If you're debating, you do it politely. When you're debating, you don't fight like you gotta just like be kind.
My kids were able to collaborate and share ideas throughout this whole project.
Yeah, sometimes she would be like, no, this is better, and I'd be like, why do you think that? And then she would kind of have like a mini debate. You never just listen to ours. Yeah, so we're definitely glad. We think we should spray for triple E because 4 people have died and 10 people have been confirmed in Michigan to have the disease.
Past couple of weeks, they've been super pumped about science and they've been really excited to continue our project. It's been awesome.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun just making the podcast and debating, doing the research. We just had a lot of fun doing this project.
My kids were really engaged because they knew they were going to share their podcast with their parents, the community, and the world.
So we're all finished with the project. We're still going to keep researching.
All right, so hopefully you were able to see some of those characteristics in play there. I particularly like a couple moments. One where the kids say, you know, we listened to it, it was horrible. I mean, how often do we get our kids actually acknowledging that their work needs to be revised, right? Normally we're having to just like cajole them into revising their work. And so I love that that self-motivation is there because they care about the fact that this is going to be seen by, you know, anybody who comes and listens to this podcast. And then my favorite quote in that is from the kid who says, even though the project's over, we're going to keep researching it, right? Because that's when I know that I've really accomplished what I set out to do as a teacher, right? I've created someone who loves to learn. So it sort of goes beyond that project, beyond that particular content area, and into something that makes them a lifelong learner. So hopefully that helps to give you a sense of what that project could look like. A link to all the sort of lesson plans for that project are also in that handout if that's something that you want to use or share with your teachers. Also, just briefly, the other thing I get is, you know, what about time? I just want to make sure that your teachers understand if you're trying to get them to embrace this, that this isn't something that you add on to what you're already doing. If you think about things that maybe they're already doing, like here's a list of things in literacy that maybe elementary students might be or teachers might be working on. How many of those things could you do with a project like the one we just watched, right? Cause and effect, compare and contrast, making connections, all of them. So I think if we stop thinking about content areas as something that we start and stop and thinking about skills that we can incorporate across a larger project, we can actually find some time. And same thing goes for math. These are just the mathematical practices from Common Core, and whether or not you're a Common Core state or not, this idea of thinking more deeply about math and more abstractly, I think that I don't know how you kind of do that without applying the sort of real world context that project-based learning gives you. So I also would like to just point out that project-based learning, you know, as I mentioned, I think it fills that gap. But I love this quote too. If a child can do advanced math, speak 3 languages, or receive top grades, but can't manage their emotions, practice conflict resolution, or handle stress, then none of that other stuff is really going to matter. So I think incorporating that social emotional learning into it is a really great way to reinvent teaching and learning as we get ready to kind of come into the post-pandemic world of schools. So I'm going to skip through a couple project examples because I want you can look at those on your own. They're in your handbook. So just look away as I speed through these, but I usually will go through you lesson by lesson so teachers can take away everything they need to actually do a project. But I want to skip to, you can look at those on your own time. There's food for thought and moments to remember. So there's some great projects lesson by lesson that you can look at and give to your teachers so they can see what projects actually look like. But I want to focus for you on how you ensure that successful implementation, right? Because if you're saying you want to do PBL and you get your teachers looking at you like this, right? You want me to do what? You need to make sure that they are on board and prepared. I mean, more than ever, right? With the teacher shortages we have, the teacher morale issues that we have, we need to make sure that they're supported. So there's kind of a 3-part plan that we typically use to make sure teachers feel ready for this and to make a school really make this transition. Professional development is obviously key. You're building that capacity in them, but you're also helping them focus on why this is important and how to accomplish it, not just what to do, and sort of honoring the profession in that way. So professional development is key, but I think also providing those instructional resources as much as you can provide so that the teachers don't have to spend as much time on their own creating all these lessons. It's really going to increase your likelihood of them actually getting done, but also it sort of models some best practice for them, right? They see what a good project looks like, and that's going to save them time. And then obviously, this always happens, right? The teachers feel really excited after a professional development session, and then they go and they're ready to implement in their classroom. And that's where, things that they couldn't have anticipated might come up. So that ongoing support gives you the ability to differentiate for those teachers who might be more experienced or less experienced, and also maximize the investment you've made in PD by giving them, that sort of backstop, right? For when they need, when they have issues, they have someone they can go to. So that three-part process is really important. So I want to share with you our PD plan. So if you are someone who's already familiar with PBL, feel free to take this and use it as your plan as well. And it's really, it boils down to something pretty simple, right? Make sure that they understand what PBL is, and you can use something like the sorting cards we just did, looking at projects as examples. So make sure we have a common understanding of what those characteristics are, what we're looking to do. Then it's as simple as find an idea, and I'll show you some resources for this, answer 3 big questions, fill out a storyboard, and then do lesson plans. So once they understand PBL, here's that sorting activity that I mentioned. Then they find an idea, and there's tons of ideas on the internet. There's no shortage of those. I happen to like this website here, and it's on your handout as well, just because they're about this length. It's about 2 paragraphs. I can look at it quickly and decide if it's something my kids are going to like to do or not, either take one or discard it. So find an idea. Remember, something that's going to interest them first. Next, these are the 3 questions you want to start with. How will this idea engage my students emotionally? What are the students going to do? Big picture. They're going to create a podcast. They're going to make a recipe book. They're going to create a biography of a senior citizen. What are they going to do? Big picture. And what are they going to learn? Also big picture, right? How to make healthy choices if it's one on nutrition, or they're going to learn to appreciate, the senior citizens in their community, right? If it's that one. So big picture, how are you going to engage your students so that you're engaging them emotionally, physically, actively somehow with what they're going to do, and cognitively with what they're going to learn. Then you can put that on. The third step is this storyboard, and this is a great graphic organizer. Our teachers love working with this to help really visualize a project. So you put those 3 questions there in the circles in the middle, but then you go on to thinking about what are the real world connections that I can bring into this? What are the content standards and skills that I can bring into this? This is when you think more specifically about what you're going to teach. What are the collaboration options that I can do, right? We swap recipe books with another class, for example, in this one. So this graphic organizer is a great way to get them thinking about the project, get some feedback at that point, maybe level it up a bit, and then they start crafting the lesson plans, right? And this is a great sort of template to use as they think about what lessons they need to teach in order to bring this project to life. So that's, like I said, that's kind of our 4-step process that we use when helping teachers kind of get into project-based learning. Feel free to take that process, use it, use the resources that are in that handout. If that's something that you would like for us to do, we have a needs analysis survey. That's a great way to get started with that. That's free. So feel free to use that. We can see if there's something that we could do to help you out with that. We'd love to make it happen, right? Once you have that survey with really PD that teachers really, really love, find really practical and fun and motivating. Second thing, instructional resources. Like I said, it's important to give them the tools they need to be successful in that. So on that document, here's several resources that you can point to them. There's the Blue Apple projects I mentioned, but there's tons of things that we offer. Every month, there's free timely topics, little mini lessons, teaching strategies, all sorts of free resources there that can help them make project-based learning a reality. There's a few of the projects that are available there. And that ongoing support, as I mentioned, that's so critical. That's where the rubber meets the road, right? So some of the most critical session topics I've listed here that typically come up, and we'll often do sort of these virtual learning sessions after a workshop to kind of keep that learning going. But the thing that teachers really love is this personalized instructional coaching, right? So whether that's lesson modeling or bringing in an expert connection for them or helping them connect with another classroom or creating a resource for them. This is a quote from one of our teachers. I love the follow through after the hands-on training. I have reached out for support and was provided with materials that I was able to use immediately. And I think that's what's so key when we talk about ongoing support, that there's somebody there to help the teacher make this reality, because it can be pretty time consuming. All right, I also included a couple of case studies. Sometimes you like to see a school put this together, and kind of people ask me from a school perspective, how long does this take, right? So this is kind of one school's journey in the 3 years of kind of trying to turn projects that the teacher is doing into inquiry-based driven PBL units. So you can kind of see here a little bit of this. I know I'm going quickly. The slides are linked in that handout as well if you want to look at this in more detail. Another kind of case study, I think this is nice to hear from a principal who really talked about how PBL helped their school get out in the community. It was really what they needed for their community to see the kind of amazing things that they were doing. So I'll leave you with this last note that PBL is more of a crock pot process than a microwave one. So if you are new to this, take your time with it. Don't expect your teachers to be doing 20 projects overnight, right? Give them the time to adjust to this, to leverage what they're already doing and acknowledge that, because there's probably a lot of these elements already there, and give them the tools they need to bring it to life. So if you like any of the resources or the PD kind of topics that we've talked about here, feel free to reach out. We would love to work with your teachers and help them make it a reality. And we want to make it affordable for you. We're a nonprofit, so our fees are super reasonable. Plus, I'm offering a 20% discount. So just email me and we can get you started if you're interested in professional development or Blue Apple projects or any of that ongoing support, as I mentioned. Lastly, if this content is something you would love your teachers to hear, one, enter to do the lunch and learn. Maybe we'll get it there and we can give it directly to your teachers. But also next month we have a free webinar, which is a lot of the same content, but with teachers directly. So I'll help them with some strategies to make PBL a reality. So as I mentioned, lunch and learn, all you got to do is email me. It's right there, tara.tarango@baei.org. Just a quick email saying, enter me for the lunch and learn. And by the end of the day, Monday, I will pick 3 winners to do this lunch and learn. Teachers actually really love it when we do this. One, they get free food and they get some practical strategies that they can implement in their classroom right away. We're really big on making sure it's super practical. All right, as I mentioned, I'm just going to get you out of here on time. It's 4:31, so the last thing I'll just ask, as soon as we end here, a survey will pop up. We always like to get your feedback on what topics we could be doing in the future, what you liked, what you don't like, what we can improve upon in these webinars. So I hope this was useful. Hopefully you found something that will work for you and helping to make PBL a reality in your school or district. And I hope we all have a great school year. It's just beginning. So have a good one. I hope to see you later. Thanks so much.